Hey guys, I'm Dave with the Trull Gallery, and today we're going to install that bookcase that I've been working on for nearly 2 months. In the previous three videos, I built the base cabinets, the doors and details for them, and then the upper cabinets for this 8-foot wide, nearly 10-foot tall bookcase. If you haven't seen those videos, I'll add their links below. They may kind of explain some of the weirdness of the installation video. And since I work alone, I had to build all these pieces so that I could install it by myself. You may also notice that the video is a little darker than usual because there aren't many lights in this room that I'm working in, and I brought in enough stuff already. I didn't need to clutter the room with lights as well. So with all that said, let's see if we can install this bookcase without getting myself killed. Before I could install anything, I had to remove some trim. I started by cutting the caulk above and below the chair rail. Then I came back with a putty knife, a pry bar, and my hammer to slowly pry the trim from the wall. By keeping the putty knife between the drywall and the pry bar, any damage to the drywall is minimized. There's a cool looking trim removal tool out there, but I just haven't bought one yet. I carefully worked my way down the length of the trim until all the nails were out, or at least loose, and then I could pry the trim away from the wall. The crown molding was removed the same way. The base molding was trimmed down for now, then that section behind the bookcase was removed. I set the base of the cabinets in place and checked for level. I used my 6-foot level and the floor was spot on. I used my torpedo level to check front to back, and lucky me, that was level 2. No shimming needed here. I located the studs and marked their location on the wall just above the base, and again higher up on the beige section of the wall. I used my laser to transfer those locations down to the base, where I secured it to the wall studs with some 2.5-inch washer-head screws. I'll need to cut an opening for this outlet in the center cabinet. After shutting off the power to this outlet at the panel, I used my level to transfer the left and right sides of the box. I'll get the height of the box by measuring up from the base, not by marking an arbitrary line on the wall and measuring down from that. That would involve math later. With the first cabinet set in place, I could trim the side base molding to size. I added an extra 3/4 of an inch to allow for the face frame later. Normally I'd have pulled this molding completely off, but there was furniture blocking the removal of this piece and a piano blocking the trim on the opposite wall. Then I came in with my multi-tool and cut the trim out. Most of this will be hidden, so it doesn't need to be perfect. With the trim cut and the base in place, it's finally time to assemble the beast. I start with the center cabinet and a bead of glue around the edge and add in the biscuits for alignment. The pocket holes I drilled earlier allow me to draw the face frame to the cabinet. The left and right cabinets go in much the same way. A little glue, a few biscuits, and the cabinet is slid into place next to the center cabinet. I added the pocket hole screws in the bottom and exterior sides. Then I connected the cabinets to each other with panel connectors. I ran my awl through the holes to align the cabinets and guide the connectors through. Then I can add the other side of the connector and draw the sides snug to each other. Once all 4 are set, I come back and tighten them down with a pair of screwdrivers. My base cabinets are all connected in one piece and they can be set in place on the base. Now I can transfer the location of the outlet onto the top of that back panel. I used a level to transfer those lines down the outside of the back, and then added the top and bottom lines on the box. I added some blue tape on the inside to minimize any blowout, and then drilled from the back to the front with a small drill bit. These holes identified the corners of the box. More tape to define the top and bottom, and I re-drilled the holes through that tape. Now we can connect the dots to draw the cutout onto the tape. I use my multi-tool to cut through the back panel. This minimizes any blowout, and if you're not too steady, just remember that the outlet plate will cover your crooked cuts. The cabinets were set back in place, and the outlet pulled through the back so I could fasten them to the wall. I double-checked the level, and I had to add a shim for most of the stud locations. The wall was pretty wavy, and I didn't want to pull the cabinets out of level. With the shims in place, I drove in more 2.5-inch washer-head screws through the upper hanging rail. One screw and a shim or two in each stud location along the wall. With the cabinets fixed in place, I could set the outlet as well. The opening was a bit taller than it should have been, and the wings of the outlet sat inside the plywood. When that happens, I use these rubber outlet spacers. I place one on each mounting screw, and then the outlet is secured to the box. The last step is to replace the faceplate and turn the outlet back on at the panel. I set the cabinet top in place. I made sure it was snug to the left side wall and the back, and then I fastened the right corner with a 2-inch wood screw. I checked the overhang, matched that on the left corner, and secured that side in place as well. Then I added more screws along the front of all 3 cabinets, securing the top. The right side panel went in next. This is also held in place with panel connectors, but one end is epoxied in place in the structure of that side panel. Again, I started all 4 before going back and tightening them down. After clipping the doors back onto the cabinets, it was time for some knobs. I have a jig for this, but left it at the shop, so I just laid out the locations on blue tape, clamped a backer board to the door, and drilled a hole to accept the screw. After pulling off the tape, the knob can be attached. These don't need to be torqued down either. I usually just snug them up by hand. I used Bloom soft close hinges for these doors, and they came with decorative covers that basically cover the mounting and adjustment screws. They just snap in place and give the hardware a nice clean look. The last piece for the bottom is adding the toe kick. I set it in place with the inside facing out and lined it up against the base molding. I used the kick as a guide from my multi-tool to cut the trim, allowing the toe kick to slide in place behind the molding. Flipping the toe kick so the good side was out, I aligned the miters at the right end and used my finish nailer to secure it in place. I needed to add a bit of persuasion at the far side to keep it tight to the floor, so I used my pry bar to force the kick down while it was nailed in place. Day 2 started with a fun challenge. I had set the left upper cabinet in place, and there was nearly a 1/2-inch variation in the wall. I taped off the stile and scribed a line. After taking the cabinet back down, I used my jigsaw and set the blade to something like a 15-degree back bevel. Then I made my cut, keeping the blade just outside that scribed line. I trimmed down to the line with a few passes of my block plane. I located a stud in the sidewall before I set the upper cabinet back in place, then drove in a few 3-inch screws to lock the cabinet tight to that wall. I tried to keep them as hidden as possible under the fixed shelf rails. The center cabinet was lifted into place, and I added glue to the biscuit joint on the upper rail. The cabinet was pulled tight to the left cabinet, and I set the panel connectors in place, locking the two together. The 2 connectors at the top were run in and tightened, and then I moved to the lower 4. This just saved me one more trip up the ladder. The right cabinet was added the same way. Before I had set the uppers in place, I had transferred the stud locations to the top of the lower cabinets. Now I can use that mark and my laser level to locate the studs behind the lower mounting rails. I drove in another 2.5-inch washer head screw at each of the stud locations to start locking the cabinet in place. Rather than try and get my laser that high, I measured the location of the lower fasteners and transferred that distance on the upper mounting rail. Again, each stud got 1 fastener along those rails. The upper side panel went in just like the lower panel. It just took a bit more wiggling. Again, the 2 upper panel connectors went in, and then the 4 lower connectors. Once everything was snugged up, it was starting to look like something. At this point, the cabinet is essentially complete. Next up is replacing the trim I had removed yesterday. I started with the chair rail. I cut a piece for both sides and added a dab of adhesive, and then nailed it in place with my finish nailer. The adhesive helps to hold things in place, since I'm just nailing it to sheetrock. Putting off the crown molding as long as possible, I took the time to caulk the chair rail, any gaps in the bookcase, or between the bookcase and the walls. I'm not going to show you how to fit the crown molding. I'm not great at it, and this molding was so wide it had to be cut on the flat. If you don't know, that requires a sliding compound miter saw with separate bevel and miter angles, and they're very fussy. I coped 2 ends and mitered 2 more. It took some time and lots of test cuts, but it came out great in the end. And my client's kids didn't learn any new naughty words. There's nothing left for me to do but pack up and head back to the shop. My customers, though, have to locate and fill those 15 adjustable shelves, and I think they have the books to do it. This was a cool, if not large, project. The build itself took nearly 2 months, and the installation was 2 full days. Now, I know I skipped over some of the details in the installation, but time was short, space was tight, and I was getting tired. But in the end, the bookcase turned out great. My clients loved it, and I'm looking forward to seeing it filled with their books and pictures. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this video. Was there something I could have done differently, smarter, safer, more efficiently? Drop them in the comments below. As usual, in the description, I've listed some of the tools and materials I've used in this build, as well as some of the tools I use for most of my builds. And some of them have affiliate links. So if you need to purchase one and you use that link, it does help keep this channel going. If you enjoyed this video, maybe you could share it with friends and give us a thumbs up. And if you haven't already, maybe it's time to hit that subscribe button and the little bell so you get notified each time I put out a new video. As usual, don't have a clue what's coming up next, but it should be something interesting. So until then, have a great day, stay safe, and we'll see you soon.